Well, folks, welcome to this. It's our number 10 today instance of getting started with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Today, we will be focusing on an area we haven't really discussed so far. We have done the entire tour of all the components that exist in the Graph Toolkit. We have gone through different use cases, different scenarios, but now today we want to go a little bit deeper and showcase how you can really improve the experience of the toolkit with customizing it, really making it your own so it fits within your app, within what you're building. So let me go through a couple of slides before we go into any of the code. So first, let's cover a little bit what is the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. If it's the first time you're hearing about the toolkit, I think it's a great reminder here. So the toolkit is a collection of reusable, framework-agnostic components and auth providers that allows you to access and work with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Think about the Graph Toolkit as a drop-in set of components that you can just drag and drop into your app, and that they are already connected to Microsoft Graph. So you don't have to think about the connectivity, think about how you need to build out all of these complex components. You just use ours and you're good to go to build an app that is connected to Microsoft 365. The components are fully functional, so they have all the behaviors you would be looking into. They are all customizable, which seems to be the topic of the day, right, today. And they work with any framework, and they work on all modern browsers. So not only you get access to something that is really meant for developer productivity, but you can use these in any of the frameworks you might be using. Think about plain JavaScript, Vue.js, React, Angular, Blazor, anything you're thinking of, you can make it work with the Graph Toolkit. Why would you think about the toolkit and why would you use it? Well, first, it really cuts on dev time, because you can easily add UI components to Access Graph with just literally a couple of lines of code. A provider, a login component, and you're good to go. You can also make them really beautiful. Out of the box, they are really beautiful. They are meant to be similar to the Microsoft 365 default and out-of-the-box components, so it feels natural for users when they see these components. But sometimes you want them to be similar to your own experiences, to your own design guidelines, to your own CSS frameworks you're using. So not only they're beautiful, but they are also very flexible for you to customize them. And finally, it works everywhere. It works in any framework, in any browser, but anywhere also. So think about maybe you're building a spa, a single page application. Well, you can use MGT for that. Teams, same thing. You want to build a Teams app, a Teams personal app, a Teams tab. There you go. You're well served, and you can use MGT as part of this. You want to use Electron to build a desktop application that renders a web page, you can do the same thing. So there are a lot of different capabilities that can be used in any types of web-based scenarios. And that's really what the toolkit is all about. Today, we're going to focus on the customization story. And we have kind of 6 areas where we really believe that you can build and bring customization to the toolkit. First, you can style the components. And we're going to have a deeper look at how styling works and how you can really make it happen. So styling is one of the type of opportunities you get with customizing MGT components. Then afterwards, we have templating. We have already covered a lot of the templating that we've done. What does it mean? It means to override or extend the way that MGT renders content in a component. So if you're happy with how a person card looks like, you don't have to touch any templating. You just leverage the one that is out of the box. But if you don't like it, or if you want to improve some of it, you can do that with bringing your own HTML, build your own logic as part of that HTML, and render parts of the MGT component with your own code. So you really have that extensibility mechanism. You can also handle events. Some of our components in MGT will trigger events. For example, when you're adding a new task using our to-do or a planner component, you will automatically know that a task was just added. So maybe you want to prompt something, you want to congratulate the user, you want to do any of these. Well, you have the ability to do that. You can register events on all of these, listen to them, and act upon these events when they are raised. Caching. These applications are very data intensive, right? You have a lot of data coming from Graph. You are storing a lot of data on your UI. Maybe you want to make sure that the data is maybe as fresh as possible, or there are some areas where you might want to say 1 hour back in time. I want to be able to store that 1 hour of data locally so I don't have to do back and forth with our components, with the graph. So today we're going to look at what caching is, how it works within MGT, and how you can play around caching to really improve the experience and deliver what you really need. Localizing components. MGT comes with a localization helper that enables you to provide your own localized keys for a lot of the labels that exist in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So we're going to see how you can affect some of the components, how you can really improve and be more accessible for people that are speaking other languages, and then we're going to be able to do that. And finally, talking about languages, and some languages are right to left instead of left to right, we're also providing the full capability to have RTL support on all of the components that are built within MGT. So without any further ado, let's go and let's look a little bit at how we can make it happen. So let me go here, let me do that, and let me actually go to my first link. I'm going to go to aka.ms/mgt/docs. And this is where all of our documentation for the Graph Toolkit sits. You zoom in a little bit. And this is really where you're going to learn about all your customization opportunities right there. So every single time we're going to talk about customization, the best way to get started is to go in the table of content here on the left side, open the customizing components, and start looking at this. And you're going to see in the samples that we're going to have, you're going to see all the links to the specific customization opportunity that are included in the code. So that way it's easy to find your way back to understand how you can customize some of these components. So as we said, styling, templating, events, caching, localization, and right to left support. So I want to start with the styling. Styling is critical to really make MGT feel natural for the users that are using your components. When you want to make a different proposition for these users in terms of styles, sometimes you want to be able to customize it as much as you want. So how does it work exactly? Let's go and see what documentation tells us. Well, what it tells us is that we are using a set of CSS custom properties. And custom properties in CSS are appearing like this. We're going to say dash dash, and it's basically we're creating a variable name with this, and we say that the avatar size here will be 34 pixels. What it means that in our code, we will be using that variable that you can override, and you can we can bring this experience inside what MGT renders. So let's start with this. So let me open up code here. Let me open up this guy here. Let me go and put it on the right side of the screen. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make it a little bit more sexy for us. So the first thing that I want to show is, again, we're starting from the same file we had the last time. We have added a couple of things here, maybe here a little of CSS. We're going to come back to this one later on. But I want to start with this styling panel here, where we are specifying, let me zoom in just one more bit. We're specifying a style tag here. And we say that an MGT person would have potentially customized style. And let's start with this here. Let me comment out this one. So what does it mean? It means that every single MGT person in my application, everywhere we're using MGT person, this avatar will become 72 pixels. So when I'm going to hit save, automatically here, you see now that MGT person just became way bigger than it used to be. So you can really do all of these capabilities. You can really bring whatever you want from a sizing standpoint, but also from a styling standpoint. So let me go back here to our documentation. And I'm going to go to the specific component that I want to customize. In that case, the person component. And in there, you're going to find on every single documentation page we have for our components, you're going to find a CSS custom properties. And here you will find the list of all available properties you can override. So all of them. You want to change the font for the line 2, for the line 3. You want to change the presence background color. You want to change the font family, the font size. You want to do some text transform. You want to do more detail spacing. Any of that, you can change them by using custom CSS thing. One of the ones that I like to do is, because it really strikes you when you see it, is when you're changing the border radius, which is this one here. Well, what's going to happen here? We're going to remove the radius, which basically will make, instead of a round avatar, we're going to have a square avatar. So when I go here, now you see that I have a square avatar. But what does it mean? It also means that not just this component gets it, but all MGT person components. So later on, we're going to talk localization, but you can see here that all the capabilities are also using that square thing. So it's really a global setting. So when you're building an app, you want to bring it to your own concerns around styling, you can really do a really, really cool thing. If you want to specify something more for one specific capability, well, you can always use class names. So you can do here and say class equals my person, and you will be able to just apply the style to my person. And now it's going to apply it just to this one, because now if I go to localization, you see here, I'm still having the small one. It's still the rounded one. So if you want to change styling for a single instance, you can do it using classes or IDs. Or if you want to do global, you can just remove this. And now it's back to global here. So that's the first thing you can do from a customization standpoint. And you can add as many properties here as you want to really bring what you're looking for as part of the styling component. So let me save that so we can go back to where we were a little bit earlier. Second thing that I want to bring up, we already covered the templating. We already covered the events in some of our previous demos. So I invite you to go and see all the recorded versions of these previous weeks, where you're going to see how everything around the templating and everything around the events. But something that we did not talk about is caching. Caching is fundamental to MGT to ensure great performance. What do we do is every single component will build its own cache that will store data, and even some components might even share some data stores or caching stores to prevent from going back and forth all the time to Graph. We're going to use what's available locally before we go to Graph if we're still in the validity period of caching. So where do we store this? Do we store that as a file on your disk or whatsoever? What we're doing is we are storing this, and let me bring that up here. We are storing everything as part of IndexedDB. So we're going to have a different set of caches in there. For example, we have the MGT user cache. So when you're looking at me, we will be storing the entire user, and here you cannot see super great that user, but we're storing the entire JSON object of that user. So when we're querying me, if we still have a valid period, by default, it's 60 minutes. So if we're still within the 60 minutes, the data might not have changed. So we're just leveraging the data that we stored in IndexedDB. We do the same thing for people. We do the same thing for photos, for files, even our MGT get component that can request basically any area of graph will get stored in this by default. But how do you even play with this? How do you even customize this capability? Well, there are a couple ways that you can make it happen. So let me, for example, here, delete all my databases. So we don't have a cache of anything. I'm going to go back to code, and I will be disabling entirely my cache service. So every time I will load data, I will always go back to Graph and ask for it. So I'm going to save this, and now you see it takes a couple of milliseconds to go back to Graph. But every time I will reload, you're going to see that, let's call it flickering, because we're going to Graph to grab the data before we can show the actual component. And here, because it's a very, very simple HTML file we're doing, we're not already pre-allocating some space or whatsoever. So it's normal we see that flickering. In a real-world application, we would not see it. So what does it mean? It means that if I go back here and I go to my application and I look here and I refresh, I still don't have anything. Okay, cool. Now maybe I want to enable just for people. And I know that in my caching scenario, I have a people component that is here. So if I hit save, now it's going to hit Graph the first time, but not the second time. So if I reload and I go straight to caching, it's already there. And now if I refresh my IndexedDB, which is a very, oh yeah, wait a second, I'm gonna remove the caching to be disabled globally. And now my caching will have stored people, users, and photos, because I have been doing some of this. And now I can see that in the people, I will find a people query, which is any. In this case, this is what drives this component right here. And now I have all the data in there, all the results that are coming back from Graph. These are stored for a specific amount of time that I can change. So maybe I'm only interested into having an invalidation period of 1,000 milliseconds. So basically, it's 1 second. Not great, but might be useful in some scenarios. Think about, for example, presence. Presence would be a good example of something you want to limit, to go back to that data a little bit more often to always ensure that you have the latest presence information, for example. But in that case, I can put it to 60,000 milliseconds, which in that case would be a minute. So we're going to store it for a full minute. I'm going to go to the caching. It's going to be stored. And in 60 seconds, it's going to go do a fetch on the data in Graph, and we'll be using it. So quite interesting thing that we have there. Now, wanted to talk a little bit about an area that is a little bit above styling. When you're building capabilities with Graph, you often host your app either in Teams, in SharePoint, or even in your own spa, and you might want to support dark mode, which is great for accessibility. Well, MGT supports natively dark mode. The only thing you have to do, for example, is to come here and add, for example, to a component. I can say here, you know what? I want to add a class here to that MGT person. I'm going to call it MGT dark. And automatically here, you see, it made it dark. So that's great for very, very, very specific areas of the UI. But what is even better, and if I completely remove this from here and I save it, I have a knob here, basically an option here where I can turn on dark mode. And what is happening is when I hit dark mode, I append the same name. So MGT dark, I'm going to append it to one of the parent objects. In that case, I'm going to append it to my body. And everything in there will become MGT dark. So when I do this, boom, everything becomes fully dark. Even here, when I'm using all of these components, you see how they are all in dark mode. So if you want to support this, there's also ways to just embed MGT dark as part of your classes. Same thing with right to left. Right to left enables you to swap the UI totally from right to left, especially for right to left languages. That's something that you can do. It's super helpful, and it's all baked into the product. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to build it. You just need to customize the colors, potentially using CSS, and you're going to be good to go. Last sample that I want to do today is around localization. Localization is an important aspect for two reasons. First, maybe you want to provide other languages to your application, but also maybe you want to redefine some of the keys that we're using or some of the labels that we're using in the toolkit to make them potentially more closer to your vocabulary or to your own taxonomy. So in this case, when I open this people card, you're going to see send emails, start chat, and a bunch of what could feel like hard-coded labels right in here. By using our localization helpers, and I'm going to uncomment these things, you will be able to say for the person card that send email link subtitle, I want it to become in French, envoyer un courriel. So in that case, I will be translating this entire card in French. So it makes a lot of sense because you want to provide this. So based potentially on the current language of the user, you could provide this set of strings or this other set of strings based on the language. And now when I save it, go back to localization, now I see that everything is now somehow in French, and all the different capabilities that you see here are also all translated. So it is a very important accessibility feature that we have where you can provide this. But if you want to provide it more, you want to be like, you don't like, for example, the send email, you prefer to say send a message, you can also not just focus on the localization aspect, but maybe more a specific messaging or a specific vocabulary that you'd like to use. In that case, you're going to see that now it says send a message instead of send an email. So those are some of the customization opportunities that I wanted you to know that really brings you to go a little bit deeper in the toolkit capabilities and how you can really make them your own inside your own app. A couple of resources before I hand it over to you, Brian. Our repo, aka.ms/mgt, our docs, our issues. If you want to see the code live that I used today, you can go to the samples at aka.ms/mgt/sandbox and a couple of other links here to get you started with MGT. Thank you, everybody, so much for the opportunity. And next week, we're going to go and start talking about how we can leverage the toolkit in another area like Teams or React or SharePoint Framework and other stuff like that. So talk to you all next week.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Seb. And I'm sure to your chagrin, we've actually had some folks requesting, can they have an individual playlist of just your MGT sessions from the community call on here? So we'll actually look into that and see if that's something we can support. But we do have individual videos for all the different presentations that go on. So, and thank you so much for coming on to talk about customizations. Great to see things like theming and localization, caching, some of the areas that we don't get to see every day. So good to see that.